Brave construction worker saves child, loses job for it. He showed up early, stayed late, always followed the rules. But on this day, doing the right thing would cost him everything. The morning air was cold, still filled with mist as he pulled into the empty parking lot. It was barely 5:45 a.m., but his old truck was always the first to arrive. He sat there for a moment, hands gripping the steering wheel, eyes staring at the half-finished tower in front of him. It looked like a giant skeleton reaching into the sky. Just another long day. Just another chance to prove himself. Again, he got out, boots crunching against the gravel, and grabbed his tool belt from the back seat. Every piece of that belt had a story. Scratches, dents, even one strap stitched back together with thread his wife had used. He adjusted his hard hat and made his way toward the site office, the quiet crunch of his steps the only sound around. He was 42, tall, and built like someone who had carried weight all his life. His skin was dark and weathered from the sun, and his hands were rough with calluses, the kind that told you he didn't just work. He worked hard. A few minutes later, younger workers started pulling in. One of them yawned as he got out of his car. "Man, how are you always this early?" he asked, rubbing his eyes. The man smiled. "Early bird gets the best parking spot." They laughed. The others respected him. Not because he was loud or bossy, because he always helped, always watched out for them. That morning, one of the younger guys was fumbling with his safety harness, the straps all twisted. "Hold on," the man said, stepping in gently. "You want it snug right here, across the chest. You never know what's coming your way." "Thanks," the kid said, a little embarrassed. "Don't worry about it," the man said, patting him on the back. "This stuff? It'll save your life if you treat it right." More workers arrived. He greeted each one by name, asked about their families, helped carry heavy gear when no one was watching. He was that kind of guy, the one everyone counted on, but the one no one at the top seemed to notice. Soon, the calm of the morning broke as a black SUV rolled up. The boss. Clean shoes, pressed shirt, the kind of man who never got dirty but always had something to say. He stepped out, looked around, and then spotted him. "You," he called. "Get up to the 32nd floor. Welding crew needs backup." The man frowned. "Sir, I was assigned groundwork today. We've got the concrete pour scheduled." The boss didn't even blink. "There's been a change. Or is it too high for you?" It was always like this. Always a test. Always something behind the words. "No, sir," he said, voice steady. "I'll go now." He turned and walked away, not fast, not slow, just steady, like he always did. A site engineer, someone who respected him, caught up quietly and whispered, "The weather report said high winds today. It's not safe up there." He nodded. "I'll be careful." In the elevator, alone, he pulled out an old faded photo from his wallet. His wife, smiling. Their 3 kids, grinning wide. He stared at it for a few seconds, breathing slowly. This is why he did everything. Why he kept quiet. Why he took the harder jobs. Why he never fought back, even when things weren't fair. When he reached the 32nd floor, the wind hit him immediately. Strong, cold, and sharp. Temporary guardrails rattled in the breeze. He clipped his harness in, checked it twice, and got to work. Sparks flew as he welded, steady and focused. His hands moved with the rhythm of years of experience. During his break, he leaned against a support column, staring out at the city below. He wasn't afraid of heights anymore, but he was starting to fear how much this place had changed. Fewer. Safety checks, rushed work, loose bolts, missing reports, ignored warnings. He thought of his kids again, his little one, showing him a drawing last night. "Look, Dad, I drew where you work." A big building with cranes and clouds. He smiled at the memory. Then a loud crack snapped him back to the present. A metal wrench rolled near the edge, left behind, unsecured. He picked it up and clipped it into his belt, shaking his head. Doesn't take much, he whispered to himself. Just one thing left loose, and it's over. He didn't know it yet, but that quiet thought, that moment, would echo later, louder than he could ever imagine. Because today wasn't going to be like other days. Today, someone would be in danger, and doing the right thing would come at a price. By mid-morning, the site was buzzing. The noise of drills, the hum of cranes, the heavy thud of boots against metal. Everyone was in motion. But even in all that chaos, he stayed calm, focused. That was how he survived, by being steady when everything else around him was falling apart. He moved across the beams with practiced steps, checking bolts as he went, tightening straps, fixing what others overlooked. It wasn't in his job description, but that didn't matter. He couldn't walk past danger and pretend it wasn't there. That's not who he was. Down below, someone shouted. A beam was off alignment. He heard it in the sound before anyone else did. Without waiting, he radioed it in and flagged the area off. Minutes later, the site engineer came by. How'd you even notice that? He gave a tired smile. It didn't sound right. She just shook her head. You have a sixth sense, I swear. He didn't. What he had was 2 decades of paying attention. Because no one else ever did it for him. And because missing something small could mean someone didn't go home that night. But no matter how many times he prevented an accident, no matter how many workers he helped train, it never seemed to earn him a seat at the table. When promotion time came, they always gave it to someone else. Usually someone younger, someone louder, someone who looked different from him. Still, he didn't complain. He just kept working. It wasn't pride, more like survival. He had mouths to feed, bills to pay, a mortgage barely holding together. His wife worked nights at the clinic, and they'd mastered the art of passing each other like ships. Quick hugs, short conversations, and long notes stuck to the fridge. Their youngest needed a new pair of shoes. His daughter was getting teased at school because her braces were crooked, and his oldest had just asked him the night before, "Dad, how come you work so hard but still get treated like you're invisible?" He didn't have an answer. Up on the 32nd floor, a gust of wind kicked up again, catching the edge of a loose tarp that snapped loudly behind him. He paused, watching it flap like a warning flag. He moved over, tied it down, then checked the perimeter for anything else left unsecured. He wasn't just looking out for himself. He was looking out for everyone, people who didn't even realize. He'd just kept them safe. And they never would. That was part of the job, too. A few hours later, during lunch, he sat on a crate in the corner of the site with a peanut butter sandwich and a bottle of warm water. He didn't eat much, just enough to keep going. He watched the others joking around, sharing stories, tossing pieces of bread to the birds that always hovered near the fences. He didn't join in, not because he didn't want to, but because over the years he'd learned that being friendly didn't always mean being accepted. Sometimes they called him the safety preacher, other times just old man. But when something went wrong, when a machine failed, or someone forgot how to lock in their harness, it was him they called, not the guy with the clipboard, not the manager who showed up late and left early. Him. He finished his sandwich and stood, brushing crumbs off his pants. As he walked back toward the main scaffold, a voice called after him. "Hey, man," one of the younger workers said, jogging up. "You mind checking my anchor point again before I go back up? I know it's probably fine, but..." "It's never just fine," the man said, kneeling down. "Double-checking is how we stay alive." The young man nodded, eyes full of respect. "Thanks. I feel safer when you're around." He didn't say anything to that, just gave a quiet nod and got back to work. Compliments were rare, but they meant something when they came from the people who knew what the job really was, as the buy. Day went on. More signs of neglect began to show. A cracked ladder rung, a broken emergency alarm on one floor, a pile of cables left in the walkway. He took pictures on his phone, again. He'd reported the same issues last week. Nothing had been done. He sent another email to the supervisor. No reply. He knew how it worked. If something bad happened, they'd say no one told them. That's why he kept records, even if they went ignored. At least he'd have proof, and maybe, just maybe, he could protect someone else. By the time, the sun started sinking behind the city skyline, casting long shadows across the steel beams. He was sore from head to toe. His back ached, his hands throbbed, and his right shoulder was starting to feel stiff from a bad turn earlier. But as he made his final round, he paused at the edge of the floor and looked out. The city below glowed softly. People getting off. Work. Parents picking up their kids. Families sitting down for dinner. He closed his eyes and took a breath. Tomorrow would be the same. The same fight, the same silence from the top, the same danger ignored until it became a headline. But for now, for this one moment, he had done everything in his power to keep the people around him safe, and he'd do it again tomorrow, even if no one said thank you, even if it cost him everything. The next morning, everything felt a little off. The usual buzz of the site was still there, cranes creaking, workers shouting over machinery, metal clanking, but there was something underneath it, something different, like the air was waiting for something to happen. He noticed it first when he pulled in. There were more vehicles in the parking lot than usual. A few cars he didn't recognize, clean ones, not the kind with toolboxes and coffee stains. By the time he reached the main site, he saw it for himself, managers scrambling around, barking orders, workers being told to stand up straight, clean your area, don't lean on anything. The whole place had suddenly gone into show mode. "What's going on?" he asked one of the guys, as he helped tie down a bundle of loose cables. "Big boss is coming," the guy whispered. "The investor? The owner?" He raised an eyebrow. That kind of visit never happened without notice. But sure enough, a shiny silver car pulled in an hour later, moving slow like it owned the place. It stopped perfectly in the marked visitor. Zone out stepped a tall man in a tailored suit, polished shoes, and sunglasses that probably cost more than a week's pay. But he didn't walk like someone soft. He had that quiet authority, the kind that didn't need yelling. He looked around slowly, taking in the sight, not saying much at first. Behind him, a small boy jumped out of the car. 7, maybe 8. Years old. Bright-eyed, full of energy. Wearing a tiny hard hat, jeans, and a Batman shirt. His mouth dropped open when he saw the cranes moving above him. "Whoa! Dad, look! It's so tall!" The owner smiled, kneeling next to his son. "Yes, it is. But remember what I said. This isn't a playground. You stay close. Always." The boy nodded seriously, though his eyes were already darting to the scaffolding, the tools, the half-built steel stairs. Curiosity doesn't care much for instructions. Then the site supervisor walked up, clipboard in hand, fake smile plastered across his face. "Mr. Crawford," he said, offering a hand. "Pleasure. If I'd known you were coming, we could have—" "That's exactly why I didn't announce it," the owner interrupted, shaking his hand quickly. "I want to see the site as it really runs." The supervisor chuckled nervously. Of course. The worker stood at a distance, watching. He didn't care about executives or surprise visits. What caught his attention was the boy, the way he moved, the way his eyes kept flicking upward, toward the scaffolding, toward places. He shouldn't be going. He knew that look. He'd seen it on his own son's face, many times, just before he climbed the kitchen counter or tried to slide down the hallway with socks on. The owner crouched again, talking to his son. "I need to check the east wing." You stay with Mr. Harris here, all right? Don't go anywhere. Don't touch anything. The boy sighed but nodded. Okay. Then the owner walked off, his assistants trailing behind, tapping on tablets and adjusting files. The supervisor gave the boy a forced smile, then immediately answered a buzzing phone. Don't go anywhere, all right? He said, without even looking. The boy wandered a few steps while the supervisor turned his back. From where he stood, the worker could see it all. He didn't like what he was seeing. The boy looked up at the stairwell that led to the first level of scaffold. He stepped toward it, hesitated, then took another step. The worker walked quickly over to the supervisor, careful not to raise alarm. Sir, he said calmly, might want to keep an eye on the kid. He's looking at the stairs. The supervisor covered his phone with his hand and glared. I said I've got it. Get back to your post. Now. The worker looked back. The boy was still near the stairs, pretending to look at something on the ground, but clearly watching the path up. The supervisor kept talking on his phone, pacing away. The worker exhaled slowly. He couldn't shake the feeling in his chest, a kind of pressure, like something was just about to go wrong. He looked up at the scaffolding. It had been rushed this week. There were missing bolts, weak barriers, places a trained adult wouldn't trust, let alone a child. He tried to signal the crane operator up high, maybe get his attention. But the guy was mid-lift, focused, eyes narrowed on the load swaying in the air. He looked back at the stairs. The boy was gone. The worker's heart skipped. He scanned fast, then saw it. The small figure, halfway up the first scaffold level, small hands gripping the railing, eyes wide with excitement. He moved fast for someone so small. Up and up, like it was a jungle gym. No one else noticed. Not yet. The worker took a step forward, torn between orders and instinct. He looked at the supervisor, still pacing, still laughing on the phone. The boy reached the second level. The wind picked up. The worker tightened his jaw, his hands clenching into fists. Not today, he whispered to himself, and then he ran. He didn't think. He just moved. His boots pounded against the gravel as he raced toward the scaffold base, eyes locked on the tiny figure now halfway to the third level. The boy's small hands gripped the railing, his little hard hat wobbling, slightly with every step. He wasn't climbing fast, but he was climbing confidently, like he believed nothing bad could happen to him. The worker's heart slammed in his chest. That kind of belief only lived in children. It was beautiful and dangerous. Hey! He called out, not too loud, not wanting to startle him. Hold up there, buddy. Let's wait for your dad, all right? The boy didn't hear him, or didn't listen. Instead, he looked up toward the next level. Higher, closer to the wind, closer to the gaps. The worker reached the bottom of the scaffold and started climbing after him. His body moved automatically, one hand over the other, boot on metal, every step driven by instinct and urgency. He clipped in his safety line, but it slowed him down. He had to do it right. He couldn't afford to fall, not today. Not when someone else's child was up there. Each time the wind blew, the scaffolding gave a slight shudder. Nothing too dramatic, but just enough to make every bolt creak. Just enough to remind him that this structure had been rushed, that corners had been cut. As he climbed, he passed exposed joints, tools left out, a section where the plywood platform was cracked right. Down the middle, he called out again. Hey, slow down, little man. You're not supposed to be up here. This time, the boy turned slightly. I'm just looking, he shouted back with a smile. I want to see the whole thing. The worker tried to keep calm. You'll see more from the ground, I promise. Just hold on where you are. Don't go any higher. But the boy was already turning again, heading for the fifth level. Below them, some of the workers were starting to notice. He heard one of the guys yell, "Is that a kid up there?" Then came the sharp, unmistakable blast of the crane horn. A long, blaring note. Not for moving a load. This one was a warning. The site engineer must have seen it from the ground. The whole area went quiet for a second as everyone looked up. The child paused mid-step. He looked around, maybe finally realizing how high he had climbed. The smile faded a little. His shoulders tensed. That's when it got worse. The wind picked up again. This time it wasn't a gentle push. It was sharp, cutting across the scaffolding like a slap. A loose tarp flapped loudly, startling the boy. He jumped just a little, but enough to knock a wrench off a ledge nearby. The workers' eyes widened as the wrench dropped, tumbling through the air. It missed the child by a foot. The boy gasped and froze. "Don't move," the worker yelled. "Just hold on to the rail." His own hands were sweating now, gripping the cold metal so tightly that his fingers ached. He had 3 more levels to go. Below, voices were rising, people calling for help, shouting into radios. He heard the words, "child on the scaffold," come through someone's walkie. Finally, the site's attention had shifted. Too late. As the boy reached the 6th level, he stepped onto a plank that wasn't secured. It tilted, just slightly, but enough to make him flinch. He reached for the guardrail to steady himself. But the guardrail wasn't real. It was a temporary rope, installed to pass inspection until the steel ones could be mounted. A rope that could barely hold the weight of a coat, let alone a child. The boy stumbled again. His small foot slipped on the edge of the plank. The rope bent under his weight, and suddenly his body tilted backward. "No!" the worker shouted, climbing faster, heart now pounding like a war drum. "Hold on!" He watched in horror as the boy dangled, one hand gripping the rope, legs kicking in the air. His hard hat tumbled off, bouncing off the platform and vanishing into the space below. The worker didn't even hear it hit the ground. He was 2 levels away. Maybe less. "I've got you. Just hang on," the child screamed, small voice cracking, with fear. "Help me! I'm gonna fall!" The worker unclipped his safety line, knowing the risk but needing the speed. He launched himself onto the final ladder, ignoring the pain in his knees, the wind, the height, everything. One more platform. 1 more second. The boy's grip slipped. The worker didn't even hesitate. As the child's fingers lost hold of the rope, his body tipping backward, the worker lunged. He hit the platform hard, metal slamming against his chest. But he caught the boy's arm in midair. One hand. That's all it took. That's all he had. The boy swung wildly, screaming, tears streaming down his face, legs kicking helplessly. "I've got you!" the worker shouted through gritted teeth. "Don't let go of me. I'm not letting go of you." His shoulders screamed in pain. His back was pressed against the edge. The wind howled around them, turning everything into chaos. But he didn't move. Not an inch. The child's weight was pulling hard, and the worker's grip started to weaken. But then, with a burst of strength, he shifted his body, braced his knees, and used his other hand to grab the boy's belt. In one slow, agonizing motion, he pulled him back to safety. The child collapsed into his arms, shaking, sobbing, clutching his shirt. "It's okay," the man whispered, voice rough and breathless. "You're safe now. I got you." Down below, a crowd had gathered. Heads tilted upward, tools dropped, phones raised, eyes wide with disbelief. But none of that mattered right now. All that mattered was the boy in his arms, and the fact that he was alive. And the truth was, it didn't matter what happened next. The man would do it again, 1,000 times. Because when someone is falling, you don't think about rules, you just catch them. The platform was still shaking when the crowd below finally started to move. Someone yelled into a radio for first aid. Others called up to ask if the boy was okay, but none of that sound seemed to reach the worker. He sat there, one arm wrapped protectively around the child, the other dangling uselessly by his side, the pain in his shoulder now unbearable. His gloves were torn, shirt stained with dirt, and his chest heaved from the effort. The boy was still holding onto him tightly, trembling, face buried against the worker's chest, too scared to let go. "You're all right now," the man whispered, barely able to breathe. "You're all right." He didn't notice the footsteps, approaching until they were right beside him. "What the hell is going on here?" The voice sliced through the air like a blade. It was the site supervisor. He stood there, red-faced and furious, as if he had just found someone taking a break, not rescuing a child from falling to his death. He didn't ask if the boy was okay. He didn't ask if the worker was hurt. All he saw was disobedience. All he saw was defiance. The worker looked up, still catching his breath. "He climbed the scaffold. I sent you to the 35th floor," the supervisor snapped, stepping closer. "You disobeyed a direct order. You abandoned your post. Do you have any idea what kind of liability you just created?" The boy whimpered and clung tighter. "No, he saved me. Don't yell at him." The worker held the boy close, trying to keep his voice calm. He was going to fall. No one was watching him. "I did what I had to do." "What you had to do?" The supervisor scoffed. "You put yourself and that child in danger. You violated safety protocol, left your assigned zone, ignored orders, because you were on your phone," the worker interrupted quietly but firmly. "I tried to warn you. You walked away." A few other workers had arrived on the platform now. They stood in awkward silence, watching the scene unfold. No one moved. No one spoke. But everyone was listening. "Pack your things," the supervisor said coldly. "You're done here." There was a stunned silence. The boy gasped. The workers stared at each other. Surely they hadn't heard that right. The man looked up slowly. "You're firing me?" "You're damn right I am," the supervisor barked. "You just risked a multi-million-dollar lawsuit. If something had happened to that boy, this site would have been shut down, and you left your post to play hero." "I saved his life," the man said, barely able to believe the words coming out of the other man's mouth. "No," the supervisor snapped, stepping closer. "You endangered a child by stepping out of line. Now get off my site. Security will escort you." The boy shook his head violently. No, don't fire him. He saved me. He held me when I was falling." But it was no use. 2 security guards appeared at the edge of the platform, uncertain, eyes full of conflict. They didn't want to do it, but orders were orders. One of the workers finally spoke up. "Boss, with all due respect, we all saw what happened. He didn't do anything wrong. What, you want to join him?" The supervisor barked. The worker went quiet. The man stood up slowly, wincing from the pain in his shoulder. He gently pried the boy's arms from around his waist and gave him a soft, reassuring look. "You're okay now," he said, voice steady. "Stay safe." "I don't want you to go," the boy cried. "You're my hero." He couldn't answer. His throat had tightened too much to speak. He turned and began walking across the platform. Each step felt heavier than the last. His shoulder throbbed. His chest burned with anger, disbelief, and shame, not for what he did, but for how it was being punished. The boy's voice followed, him as he left. "Don't fire him, please. He saved me." But no one listened. Down at the site's ground level, workers had begun to gather. Word had spread fast. A man who saved a child was being let go in front of everyone. No thank you. No recognition. Just a punishment for doing the right thing. Phones were already out, not to gossip, but to document. Quiet recordings of the confrontation, photos of the broken barrier, the missing safety rail, the boss on his phone while the child climbed. The truth was already beginning to collect like rain in a storm cloud, but the man didn't know that, yet. He made his way to his locker, shoulders low but back straight. He took out his lunchbox, a photo of his family taped inside. His hands shook as he grabbed his coat. The security guards followed behind, silent, uncomfortable. As he left the site, the boy broke free from the crowd and tried to run after him. A worker gently held him back, tears running down the boy's cheeks. "He's a hero!" the boy cried. "Why are they firing a hero?" The man didn't look back. He couldn't. If he did, he might break. And today, he'd already done enough. Falling for everyone. By the time he got home, he was completely numb. His shoulder was screaming. His back felt like it had been bent in half. But none of that hurt like the silence in his chest, the part where dignity used to sit. He pulled into the driveway slowly, the way someone does when they're trying to delay the inevitable. Inside, the lights were on. He could see his wife at the sink, drying dishes. His youngest, home early from school, was playing with toy trucks on the floor. The house looked peaceful. Normal. But nothing felt normal anymore. He opened the door quietly. His wife turned, smiling, but it faded the moment she saw his face. The bruises on his arms, the way he was holding his shoulder, the defeated weight in his eyes. "What happened?" she asked, moving toward him. He didn't answer right away. He just sat down at the table and opened his lunchbox. Inside, untouched, was his sandwich, and tucked into the lid, that same photo of his family. He stared at it for a long time. Then he told her everything about the boy, the scaffold, the moment the rope gave way, the way he caught him, the way the supervisor shouted, not with gratitude, but blame. How he got fired, in front of everyone. In front of the child he saved. His wife didn't speak for a long time. Her hands gripped the edge of the chair, knuckles white. Her voice, when it came, was quiet but sharp. "They fired you? For saving a child?" He nodded. Her voice trembled. 20 years. You've broken your back for that site, and they throw you out like you're trash?" He didn't know what to say. He had tried his whole life to avoid being angry, to stay level, to not give anyone a reason to see him as a threat. But now he felt something rising in his throat. Not rage, but something heavier. Exhaustion. "They never saw me," he finally said. "They just saw what they wanted to. Until they needed someone to blame." Across town, though, things were starting to shift. Back at the construction site, the air was no longer tense. It was electric. Workers gathered in groups during their break. Voices hushed but fierce. Nobody was talking about measurements or timelines anymore. They were talking about what they'd seen. "I watched the whole thing," one said. "That kid was gone if he didn't catch him. He flew down, that scaffold like he had wings. You don't fake that kind of instinct." "I got it on video," whispered another, holding up his phone. "Whole thing. From the ground." One of the younger workers, the same one who'd once asked the man to help with his harness, stood at the edge of the group. He wasn't the type to speak up, but today something inside him cracked. "Boss threatened me too," he said quietly. "When I tried to defend him, told me I'd never work again. That did it." Voices rose. Phones came out. Stories spilled like water through a broken dam. Everyone had one. Times when they were ignored. Unsafe gear. Rushed inspections. And through it all, the one guy who always had their back. "He saved me my second week," one man said. "A steel beam slipped, and he caught it before it crushed my foot." "He's been writing up safety reports for years," added another. "Harris just tosses them, pretends they never existed." The site engineer had heard enough. She went straight to her trailer and downloaded every camera angle from the last 48 hours. The footage was crystal clear. The boy climbing, the man reacting, the rescue, the confrontation. She watched it twice. Then she started organizing everything. Incident logs, missed inspections, ignored emails. Things she had kept quietly for too long. Now, it was time to speak. Up in the crane, The operator who had honked the alarm used his high vantage point to take still shots of the scene. The broken rope rail, the unsecured tools, the stunned look on the supervisor's face when he realized people were watching. He posted them anonymously. By late afternoon, the story was already spreading beyond the site. Someone sent the video to a friend at another construction company. That friend posted it online with the caption, "He saved a child's life, then they fired him." It didn't take long. Shares turned into comments. Comments turned into outrage. People from all over, workers, parents, even strangers, started demanding answers. "Where's the justice?" they asked. "Where's the apology?" The next morning, reporters were waiting outside the site gate. Microphones, cameras, questions. The supervisor arrived looking smug, until he saw the crowd. "Can you explain why a man who saved a child is now unemployed?" One journalist asked. "No comment," the supervisor muttered, pushing through. But the workers didn't stay silent. One by one, they stepped forward. Not in protest, but in truth. "I watched him save that boy. He trained me on day one, taught me how to check my harness, told me to always speak up even if no one's listening. He's the reason I go home in one piece every day." And then came the voice that stopped everything. It was small, but certain. The boy had returned with his father, the investor, the one who actually owned the project. He stood quietly, his little hard hat in hand, tears still in his eyes. "Darius saved me," the boy said. "He's not just a worker, he's a hero." And for the first time, the silence wasn't heavy. It was waiting for what would come next. The morning was still young, but the sun seemed brighter than usual as it poured over the construction site. Workers stood quietly in the yard, helmets in hand, safety vests faded from long hours on the job. But today, no one was focused on beams or blueprints. Everyone was waiting. A temporary platform had been set up near the office trailers. Beside it stood the site engineer, a few senior executives, and the owner, the boy's father. He was dressed more casually this time. No suit. Just a plain shirt and a look on his face that meant business. But all eyes were waiting for one person, Darius. He stood at the edge of the crowd with his wife. His injured shoulder was still stiff, arm in a sling, but he stood tall, strong, quiet, the way he always had. The owner stepped forward, cleared his throat. "We're not here to hide mistakes today," he said, his voice steady. "We're here to admit them, fix them, and honor someone who did what none of us had the courage to." He turned to Darius and gestured gently. "Come on up here." The crowd parted as Darius walked slowly toward the front. A few of his co-workers clapped softly, respectfully. Others gave him a nod, a small smile, a pat on the shoulder. Even those who had never spoken more than a few words to him looked at him now with something more than respect, with admiration. When he reached the platform, the owner turned to the crowd again. "3 days ago, my son nearly lost his life. And he would have, if not for this man." The boy, wearing a new Batman shirt and a pair of untied sneakers, ran up and wrapped his arms around Darius's waist. He held on tight. "You're my hero," he whispered again. Darius smiled, resting, his good hand on the boy's back. It was the only title he'd ever needed. The owner continued, "But what happened after that rescue? That was the real tragedy. Instead of being celebrated, Darius was punished, fired, blamed." He turned to Darius. "We failed you." The site went quiet. The man's voice softened. "I've seen the footage. I've read the reports. I've listened to every worker on this site who came forward. And what I see is this: a man who has spent 20 years doing more than his job. A man who has mentored, protected, and cared for everyone else. And a man who, even in the face of injustice, never raised his voice, never asked for praise." The site engineer stepped forward. He's the reason this project hasn't had a serious accident in 5 years, she said. Even when his warnings were ignored, he never gave up on trying to keep us safe. The owner nodded, then turned back to Darius. We can't undo what was done, but we can make it right now. He reached into his folder and pulled out a single paper. This is a formal apology on behalf of this company, but more than that, it's an offer. He handed the paper to Darius. We want to appoint you as Director of Site Safety and Worker Relations, not just for this project, but for all our sites. Full benefits, full authority. No middlemen. You'll report directly to me. There were murmurs in the crowd, then applause, then cheering. Darius looked down at the paper in his hand, then at his wife, who stood nearby, tears streaming down her cheeks. Then at the boy, who was still holding his leg like it was the safest place in the world. He looked up again, eyes clear. I accept, he said quietly. The crowd erupted. Cheers, clapping, whistles, even the honk of the crane above, like a salute from the skies. But Darius raised a hand and waited for the noise to calm. I didn't save that boy for a reward, he said. I did it because it was right. Because I wouldn't be able to sleep knowing I saw danger and looked the other way. He paused, letting his words settle. But this isn't just about me. There are too many workers out here every day doing their best and getting overlooked or ignored or punished for speaking up. He turned to the crew, the faces he knew so well. We don't just build buildings, we build futures, for our families, for our communities, and we deserve to do that in a place where we're respected and safe and heard. One by one, heads nodded, eyes welled, shoulders lifted. This changes today, Darius finished, and it did. That afternoon, old safety gear was thrown out. New equipment arrived. Workers were encouraged to report problems without fear. Weekly meetings were added. Paychecks were reviewed. The culture shifted, not overnight, but clearly. And it all began because one man did the right thing, even when it cost him everything. By week's end, Darius's story had gone viral. News stations aired the rescue. Parents wrote in, thanking him. Other workers from around the country shared similar stories. A movement was forming. The boys' school even invited Darius for career day. He stood in front of a class of wide-eyed second graders, telling them about strength, safety, and standing up for what's right. At the end, one kid asked, "Were you scared when you saved him?" Darius smiled. "Of course I was," he said. "But I was more scared of doing nothing." As he left the classroom that day, the boy ran after him, holding something in his hand, a crayon drawing. It showed a tall building, a small boy near the edge, and a man in a hard hat with a strong arm catching him just in time. At the top of the page, in shaky block letters, it said, "Real Hero." Darius framed it, and every morning after that, when he walked into work, he didn't just carry a tool belt or a clipboard, he carried a legacy, built not on concrete or steel, but on courage, and the belief that doing the right thing, no matter the cost, will always build something that lasts.